Narrator, Lily, 1994, Ohio. There are moments in life when you feel something before you can even think about it. It hits you like a punch to the gut. You just know something is wrong, even if you can't explain why. That night at 2:07 a.m., with the cold wind licking the back of my neck, I felt exactly that. All I wanted was to get home. My shift was over, and I hopped on my bike, knowing no one was waiting for me. Mom worked through the night. The streets were empty. The flickering glow of the streetlights cast weak, fading stains onto the pavement. I could hear my own breathing, the soft hum of my tires against the asphalt, and the distant growl of the highway. Everything was normal at first. Then I noticed the sound of an engine. Slow but steady. I tried to convince myself not to look back right away. Maybe it was just someone heading home. Maybe it was nothing. But deep inside, somewhere raw and primal, I knew I had to run. I turned my head. A black car drifted into the glow of a streetlight behind me. Long old model, tinted windows. It slowed down. I pedaled faster. The car sped up. Now my heart was pounding in my ears. My fingers clamped around the handlebars so tightly they started to go numb. I took a sharp right turn. Then another. So did the car. It was playing with me. Every nerve in my body screamed, "Run!" Now, I rode like hell. Up ahead, there was an abandoned construction site. Piles of sandbags. Rusted scaffolding. If I cut through, maybe I could lose them. Then, headlights flared, blinding me. In that split second of white-hot blindness, my bike hit a pothole. My body jerked sideways and I crashed, slamming into the pavement. Pain shot through me, but I didn't care. I tried to scramble to my feet. A pair of black boots stepped into my vision. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. A rough hand seized my hair. Another clamped around my throat. Then, darkness. I must have blacked out. No idea how long I was out or what time it was when I came to. I tried to open my eyes. Nothing. My eyelids felt like they were weighed down with stone. My whole body was numb. Sounds echoed inside my head, distant and warped like I was underwater. Was my heart still beating? Was I still breathing? Then I realized something else. I couldn't move. My wrists, my ankles, they were tied tight. My eyes covered with some kind of cloth. I tried to scream, but my throat was too dry. How long had I been here? Where was I? Slowly, a smell crept into my senses. Damp metal. Old wood. Mold, so thick it made my stomach churn. I was on the ground. A hard, dirty surface. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Don't panic, Lily. If I panicked, I'd stop thinking straight. I had to get out of here. But first, I had to figure out where here was. I turned my head slightly, listening. Silence. But I felt him. He was here, waiting, watching. How close was he? A few feet away? Right above me? I tried to breathe carefully. I tried to move my arms, but the ropes were tight, biting into my wrists. My ankles were bound too, my legs stiff and cramped. Escape felt impossible. And in that moment I knew I wasn't getting out of this. Then, the ground trembled slightly. A door creaked open. Footsteps echoed. Slow, heavy, deliberate. As if even time itself obeyed his movements. He was coming closer. My heart slammed against my ribs. I held my breath. Then, a hand touched my shoulder. A jolt of terror shot through me. The hand was large, cold, human, but not quite. It felt wrong, like something was touching me that shouldn't be able to, something worse than a person. Fingers slid from my shoulder to my neck, slow and deliberate. Then the voice came. Deep, rough, and wrong. Resist and you die. Just a few words. But they cut through me like a knife. He wasn't trying to reassure me. There was pleasure in that voice. Like a game. Like he was watching me, studying me. I swallowed hard. I had to try. My voice was weak but audible. What do you want? He didn't answer. But he did do something. He pulled the cloth from my eyes. A burst of light hit me, blinding at first. Everything blurred, hazy and distorted. But then, I saw. The room was empty. Just me. But he was here, watching me. Somewhere in the dark, lurking in the shadows. Waiting. Time lost all meaning. Hours? Days? I had no idea. All I knew was that this place was cold, dark, and inescapable. The air was thick with the stench of damp concrete, rusted metal, and mold. Every breath I took filled my lungs with decay. The room felt like a basement. Thick stone walls closed in around me. I was on the ground. Every inch of me ached. My wrists and ankles were bound tight. Worse than the pain was the energy in this place, something that made my skin crawl, something that told me I didn't belong here. And he was here. Even my breathing felt too loud. He was waiting. Somewhere I couldn't see, but I could feel him. A single light bulb dangled from the ceiling, casting a weak yellow glow. I turned my head, scanning the walls. No exit. No door. At least not one I could see. Escaping seemed impossible. But I would find a way. Then, a sharp metallic scrape, rusted metal shifting, chains, and footsteps. In that moment, my entire world stopped. Slow, deep, calculated, like something crawling out of the shadows, merging with reality itself. Watching me. He was here. I held my breath. The footsteps came closer. Then, a kick. The first blow to my stomach knocked the air right out of me. My body curled in on itself, lungs seizing as they desperately tried to pull in air. Then another, and another. Each strike sliced through me like a blade. But worse than the pain, worse than the agony, was the silence. No warning, no explanation, no words. Just violence. Pain swallowed me whole, like a black hole I couldn't escape. Then he grabbed me and threw me onto an old, rusted bed frame. This was only the beginning. I cried until there was nothing left. Minutes passed like days. And the days, they never seemed to end. I wasn't eating. I wasn't drinking. I wasn't sleeping. It only got worse. I stopped believing I would ever get out. I started to believe I was going to die here. When he took me to the bathroom, he carried me there. Carried me back. At some point, I realized I had to adapt if I wanted to survive. I stopped fighting. Stopped screaming. Stopped crying. I pretended to accept it. One day, maybe I had earned a sliver of his trust, because he untied my hands and feet. He leaned in, breath hot against my ear, and whispered, "Don't even think about running." I had no sense of time anymore. But I knew, if I didn't get out of here, I would never see the sun again. I forced myself to eat the disgusting sandwiches he gave me, drank the water. If I ever got a chance to escape, I had to be strong enough to take it. I even wanted more food. One day, I lifted my head and noticed the dim light bulb still swaying from the ceiling. Its glow was weak, flickering, unable to push back the darkness completely. Shadows still thrived in the corners of the room. My body was exhausted, aching everywhere. But my mind was still searching. There had to be a way out. The door let out a long, heavy creak. My stomach clenched. The footsteps were slow, careful, calculated. I felt him coming before I even saw him. He knew fear was crawling through my veins, and he enjoyed it. A dark shape appeared in the doorway. I couldn't see his face, but I felt him. He took another step. The air in the room shifted, like the temperature had dropped. His skin was ice cold. Then, a breath against my cheek. Cold, damp. My hands and feet were still bound. Even if I struggled, it wouldn't matter. Then, sharp, searing pain. I clenched my teeth. He had struck my knee, hard. I squeezed my eyes shut. But I wouldn't scream. That's what he wanted. He wanted to break me. I wouldn't play his game. I lifted my head. And for just a moment, I saw him, crouched beside me. The shadows hid his face, but his body was tense. He hesitated. And that was my chance. I locked eyes with him, or at least where I thought his eyes were. I would ruin his game. Silence. Neither of us breathed. And then, something changed in his mind. He realized I wasn't afraid of him. But that didn't mean he would back down. Without warning, the back of his hand struck my face. My head snapped to the side. The metallic taste of blood flooded my tongue. But I didn't fall. I stayed upright. He would see that he couldn't break me. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he stepped back. His footsteps retreated toward the door. Slowly, the door shut. I was alone. But that meant I had time. Time to plan my next move. The ropes were loosening. Not enough to be free, but enough. Each time I moved, the fibers dug deeper into my skin, carving fresh wounds into my wrists. The pain was unbearable. But if I succeeded, it would be worth it. There was only one thought in my mind. Escape. I listened carefully. He was still nearby. I wanted to believe he had left. But it was too quiet. So quiet I could hear him breathing. He was watching me, waiting. I needed more time. If I rushed, he would notice. I adjusted my eyes to the dark, scanning the room again. The ceiling was low. Metal pipes ran along the corners. Rusty chains littered the floor. An old wooden crate sat in the corner. If I got free, I could use it as a weapon. I controlled my breathing, shifted my hands, felt the warmth of blood trickling from my wrists. Just a little more. Finally, one hand was free. I let out a shaky breath. Clutching my sore wrist, I moved to my other hand. My feet were still bound. Were his footsteps getting closer? Then, the doorknob turned, slowly. My pulse spiked. Now or never. I freed my left hand. There was no time to untie my feet. As his shadow filled the doorway, my fingers wrapped around the nearest chain. And I swung. The metal struck flesh with a sickening crack. He staggered. Off balance, I struck again. And again, until he finally hit the ground. But he was still moving. This was my only chance. I took advantage of the moment to free my legs. My fingers trembled, but I could feel the ropes loosening. Blood dripped from my wrists onto the cold floor, but I didn't care. Finally, I was free. I had no other choice. If I stayed here, I would never get to tell this story. But then, for a split second, I hesitated. I had to see his face. If I could see him, I'd have a real chance of getting him caught. It was a huge risk, but it was an instinct. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it at his face. The man who had done all this to me. The monster who had assaulted me over and over again. Disgust twisted in my stomach. But I memorized every inch of his face. And then I ran. I burst into the hallway. Cold air filled my lungs, but there was no time to breathe. I had no idea where I was going. I just had to run. It was an old house. Black curtains covered the windows. The air smelled of damp rot. Then I saw the door. I ran toward it. Locked. No hesitation. I grabbed a heavy statue from a table and smashed the window. Glass shattered. I threw myself outside. The place was desolate. But I burned every detail into my memory as I ran. A few meters away, I glanced back and saw him. He was getting into his car. Pure terror flooded me. I had tasted freedom. I would never go back. I ran until my lungs screamed. Dived into the woods. Branches scratched my skin, but I didn't stop. I kept running, hundreds of meters through the trees. Then finally, I stumbled onto a road. A white car approached. A couple inside. Without thinking, I threw myself in front of it. "Please help me," I gasped. And then, darkness. I woke up to fluorescent white lights burning my eyes. For a moment, I didn't understand where I was. The air smelled sterile, like a hospital. Then, memories hit me like a tidal wave. The room, the fear suffocating me, the dark shadow I left behind. My body ached. Scars, bruises. But I had made it. I was alive. The room was full of cops. One of them was writing something down. Another murmured into his radio. A few nurses whispered by the door, "She's awake." A man approached me. Middle-aged, hard eyes. His badge said Carter. "Lily, you're safe here," he said calmly. "Can you tell us what happened?" My throat was dry. I swallowed. How could I even begin to explain? With a trembling voice, I told them, the abduction, the room, the chains, the dark, suffocating space. When I spoke about the assaults, a lump formed in my throat. I was terrified they wouldn't believe me. The room was silent. All eyes were on me. "He stalked me for months," I whispered. This was planned. And I know I wasn't his first victim. A few officers glanced at their notes, exchanged tense looks. "Lily," Carter said, "have you seen this man before? Can you describe him?" I held my breath. Yes, his face was burned into my mind. I would never forget it. I can have a sketch drawn, I said. They brought in a forensic artist. I described every detail. The coldness in his eyes, the sharp angles of his face, the hollow cheeks. As the sketch took form, the tension in the room thickened. One officer stood. Another rushed out, talking into his radio. The artist put down his pencil. Is this him? I stared at the drawing. Those eyes. My stomach twisted. I couldn't breathe. But I nodded. Yes, I whispered. It's him. Carter took the paper. He froze for a second, then turned to his partner. This could be him. More officers gathered. They murmured names. Names I didn't recognize. A case. A killer. One cop rushed outside. This might be our guy, he said into his radio. Carter exhaled sharply. Lily, he said, turning to me. Can you tell us where the house is? I closed my eyes. Even in my shock, I had memorized the way out. If I could tell them, they could catch him. Yes, I said. Follow me. That night they found the house. And inside, a nightmare. Chains. Rooms designed for torture. A twisted collection of personal belongings. Trophies from his victims. And evidence linking him to the deaths of 14 girls. The serial killer they had been searching for. But he was gone. By the time the police raided the house, he had already vanished. For days they searched. Then, one night, at a gas station, a man stepped out of his car, picked up the fuel nozzle, and in that instant, police cars swarmed the station. They caught him. He didn't resist. He didn't speak, just like he never spoke to me. The newspapers the next morning called him the devil. But to me, he was just a name, a shadow, and a face I never wanted to see again.